So, the investor called me personally, my sister Victoria said, swirling her Pinot Grigio. He says my branding strategy is the only reason he's buying the company. My parents beamed. I checked my watch. 3, 2, 1.
My phone rang. Loud. Ugly.
It cut through the crystal clinking silence of our Easter dinner. Morgan, turn that off, my father snapped. I did not. I slid my finger across the screen and put it on speaker. Transfer complete. The voice on the other end said, $50.4 million wired to Vertex Branding. The table froze. I did not look up from my plate. Excellent, I said, my voice steady. Execute the acquisition clause immediately. And fire the vice president for gross negligence. Today. I hung up. Then I finally looked at my sister. Before I tell you how I bought my sister's company just to fire her, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? I want to hear your story. Growing up in Highland Park was like living inside a jewelry box. Everything was polished, expensive, and fragile. My parents, James and Lisa, treated life as a performance, and my sister Victoria was their star. She was loud, blonde, and perfect for the stage they had built. I was quiet, dark-haired, and obsessed with things you could not see. Code, logic, the hidden wiring behind the walls. They did not know what to do with me, so they did nothing. I became the ghost in their perfect house. The architecture of their neglect was not accidental, it was structural. I remember the day it became undeniable. I was 12. I had just won the state chess championship. Not a participation trophy, but first place against 300 competitors. I walked home with a heavy gold trophy in my backpack, my heart pounding with a desperate, foolish hope. When I opened the door, the house was already vibrating with excitement. But not for me. Victoria, 15, had just been named second runner-up in the local Mississippi Teen Highland Park pageant. Look at her, my mother shrieked, adjusting a sash on Victoria that cost more than my entire computer setup. A princess. We have to celebrate. Mom, I said, holding up my trophy. I won state. She glanced at it, then back at Victoria. That's nice, Morgan. Put it in your room. We're going to the country club for dinner to celebrate your sister. Go change into something that isn't that. That night, while they toasted Victoria's third-place finish with sparkling cider and filet mignon, I sat in my room and ate a peanut butter sandwich. I looked at my trophy, gleaming under my desk lamp, and then at the empty spot on the mantel where it should have been. The mantel was crowded with Victoria's participation ribbons and most spirited certificates. There was simply no room for my gold. I did not understand it then, but I do now. In sociology, they call it the golden child/black sheep dynamic. Dysfunctional family systems are like unstable chemical compounds. They need a stabilizer. My parents were deeply insecure people, terrified of being average. They needed a golden child to project their fantasies of perfection onto. That was Victoria. But a golden child cannot exist without a contrast. They needed a black sheep to absorb their anxieties, their failures, their disappointments. That was me. I was not just ignored. I was necessary. My failure was the fuel for Victoria's success. If I succeeded, it threatened the entire ecosystem. If the black sheep is actually the winner, then the golden child might just be average. And that was a truth my parents could not survive. So, they architected a reality where my victories were invisible and Victoria's failures were just steps to greatness. That night, at 12 years old, the tears stopped. The asking stopped. I realized that if I wanted to build anything in this life, I would have to build it alone, in the dark, where they could not see it to tear it down. I put the chess trophy in the back of my closet, closed the door, and opened my first coding textbook. I did not know it yet, but I had just laid the first brick of an empire they would never see coming until it was too late. I left the house at 18. Not with a bang, but with a backpack. Victoria went to Northwestern on a full parental scholarship, complete with a luxury condo and a monthly allowance that rivaled a corporate salary. I moved into a basement apartment in Wicker Park that smelled of damp concrete and cheap ramen. My parents did not offer to help, and I did not ask. I had something better than their money. I had silence. While Victoria was networking at sorority mixers and failing upward into internships secured by my father's golf buddies, I was building Ether Logic. It started on a laptop I rebuilt from spare parts. I did not want to make apps or flashy consumer tech. I wanted to build the plumbing, the invisible, unsexy logistical AI that made the internet actually work. I spent 20 hours a day staring at lines of code until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. I lived on caffeine and spite. The code of silence became my religion. I never told them about the first contract I landed with a major shipping firm. I never told them when I hired my first employee, a brilliant dropout named Davi who worked for equity, because I could not pay him. I never told them when we moved from my basement to a real office in the Loop. To my family, I was just Morgan who fixes computers. They assumed I was IT support, resetting passwords for people who forgot them. I let them believe it. It was safer that way. Uncle Jeffrey was the only crack in the wall. He was my mother's brother, the quiet one at family dinners who never bragged. One day, he showed up at my gritty apartment with a check for $24,000. "It's not charity," he said, looking at my server rack humming in the corner. "It's an investment." "I see what you're doing, Morgan. Don't tell your mother." He became my silent partner, my mentor, the only person who knew that the black sheep was actually a wolf in waiting. Years passed. Ether Logic grew from a startup into a juggernaut. We optimized global supply chains, streamlined data centers, and secured cloud infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies. I bought a penthouse in the city under an LLC, but I kept my old car. I wore hoodies, not suits. I accumulated wealth not to spend it, but to fortify myself. Every dollar was a brick in a wall that my family could never breach. Meanwhile, Victoria graduated and was immediately handed a VP role at Vertex Branding, a company my parents had heavily invested in. She posted photos of her corner office, her team lunches, her girl boss lifestyle. She did not know how to read a balance sheet. She did not know her profit margins. She just knew how to look successful. I watched from the shadows, my empire growing silently beneath the surface of their shallow world. I was the invisible titan, and they were dancing on top of a volcano. Flash forward to last year. I was 31. Ether Logic was worth $300 million. I had just closed a deal with a massive logistics firm in Tokyo. But on Sunday night, I was sitting at my parents' dining table in Highland Park, picking at a dry piece of chicken, while Victoria explained why my shoes were off-brand. "You're a pretty girl, Morgan," she said, her voice dripping with that specific, localized pity she had perfected. "But you dress like you work at a call center. Seriously, Vertex is launching a new personal branding workshop.
I could get you a discount.
We could fix you." "Yeah, Morgan." My dad chimed in, refilling his wine glass. "Listen to your sister. She knows about image. You're still doing that computer repair thing? What is it again?" "Fixing laptops." "It's infrastructure, Dad," I said, my voice tight. "Back-end logistics." Right. Laptops," he dismissed, turning back to Victoria. "Tell us more about the gala, honey. Who was there?" I sat there, my knuckles white under the table. I could have bought the entire country club they were discussing. I could have hired Victoria's boss as my personal assistant. But I said nothing.
Why?
Why did I keep coming back to this table to be dissected? In psychology, they call it the trap of normalizing cruelty. When you grow up in an environment where love is conditional and mockery is the default language, you do not recognize it as abuse. You recognize it as home. Your brain normalizes the pain because the alternative, admitting that the people who are supposed to love you actually despise you, is too devastating to process. But the most dangerous part is not the cruelty. It is the hope. It is the addiction to the idea that maybe this time, if I just achieve enough, if I just explain it right, they will see me. They will look at me with the same adoration they give Victoria. That hope is a poison. It keeps you coming back to the well that has been dry since you were born, begging for a drop of water. I almost broke that night. I almost slammed my bank statement on the table. But I caught Uncle Jeffrey's eye. He shook his head, a microscopic movement. He knew. He knew that revealing my success prematurely would just give them something new to consume. They would not be proud. They would be entitled. They would claim my empire was theirs because they raised me. Patience, his eyes said. Don't give them your light until you can use it to blind them. So I swallowed the rage. I took a bite of the dried chicken. I let Victoria critique my haircut. I let my mother sigh about my lack of ambition. I let them fill their hollow lives with the sound of their own voices, unaware that the quiet girl at the end of the table was holding the match that would burn their fantasy to the ground. The opportunity arrived 6 months later, wrapped in a nondescript manila envelope. EtherLogic was looking to acquire a branding agency. We needed client lists, PR infrastructure, and a public face for our new consumer division. My acquisitions team presented me with 3 options. One of them was Vertex branding. I stared at the name on the screen. It was fate, or maybe just market inevitability. Vertex was bleeding money. Their client retention was plummeting. I authorized a deep dive investigation under a shell company, Argos Holdings. I wanted to see the books. I wanted to see exactly how much damage Victoria had done. What I found was worse than incompetence. It was criminal. I sat in my office with my forensic accountant, Sarah, looking at a series of redacted files. Here, she said, pointing to a ledger entry. Client deposits moved to operating expenses, then moved again to a personal offshore account. And here, customer data sold to third-party aggregators without consent. My blood ran cold. Victoria wasn't just failing. She was embezzling. She was selling client financial data to cover her losses and maintain her lifestyle. If this got out, it would not just be bankruptcy. It would be federal prison. It would be the end of our family name. My parents, who had co-signed loans and served on the board, would be ruined. They would lose the house in Highland Park, their social standing, everything. I sat back in my chair, the city skyline glittering behind me. I had a choice. I could let it burn. I could let the SEC raid their offices and watch my sister get handcuffed on the evening news. It would be the ultimate vindication. The golden child, exposed as a fraud. The black sheep, watching from her high tower. But then I thought about Uncle Jeffrey. I thought about the name Vertex, which my grandfather had started 50 years ago before my dad took it over. I thought about the shame that would stain all of us, forever. Buy it, I said to Sarah. Morgan, she warned. It's a toxic asset. The liability is massive. I know. Buy it. Quietly. Seal the records. Patch the data, leak immediately. Refund the clients from my personal reserves. Make it look like a clerical error. Bury it so deep that no one will ever find it. Why? She asked. Why save them? Because, I said, signing the authorization form with a steady hand. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it because I can. And because when I fire her, I want her to know that I didn't just beat her. I saved her. I bought the company on a Tuesday. I paid $50.4 million, 20% above market value, to ensure the board accepted immediately without asking questions. I own Vertex branding. I own my sister's career. I owned the family legacy. And they had no idea. It was the silence that hit me first. The clinking of silverware stopped. The hum of conversation died. $50.4 million is a number that sucks the air out of a room. Victoria stared at me, her mouth slightly open, a piece of asparagus suspended on her fork. What? She whispered. My mother laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Morgan, don't be ridiculous.
Put your phone away.
We're celebrating your sister. I did not answer. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I placed it on the table, right next to the floral centerpiece Victoria had insisted on. I opened it. Inside were the acquisition papers, stamped and notarized. And next to them, a red folder marked Confidential, Forensic Audit. I'm not being ridiculous, Mom, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. I'm being the owner. As of 3 minutes ago, EtherLogic acquired Vertex branding. I own the building you work in, Victoria. I own your client list. I own your title. My father stood up, his face flushing red. This is insane. You fix laptops. You live in a shoebox. You don't have $50 million. I don't fix laptops, Dad, I said, looking him in the eye. I build the infrastructure that runs the logistics for 40% of the Fortune 500. EtherLogic is valued at $360 million. I built it while you were busy driving Victoria to pageants. Victoria snatched the papers. Her eyes scanned the lines, desperate to find a flaw, a joke, a lie. But there were none. Her face went pale. You bought my company? I did, I said. And now, we need to talk about your performance. I opened the red folder. Client retention is down 40%. Revenue is bleeding. And this, I pointed to a highlighted section, is a data leak involving the financial records of your 3 biggest clients. You hid it. You sold the data to cover your losses. That's not just incompetence, Victoria. That's fraud. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I bought the company to save it, I continued. But more importantly, I bought it to save this family from federal prison. I patched the leak this morning. I refunded the clients from my personal accounts. The scandal is buried. You're welcome. Victoria looked like she was shrinking. Her posture, usually so erect and proud, collapsed. Morgan. But I can't keep you, I said, closing the folder. You're fired. Effective immediately. Your severance package is in the mail. It's generous. More generous than you deserve. My father sat down heavily. Morgan, we had no idea. We're so proud. No, I said, cutting him off. You're not proud. You're relieved. You're impressed by the money.
But you don't know me.
You never did. You loved the idea of a successful daughter, and when you thought it was Victoria, you worshipped her. Now that it's me, you want to pivot. But it's too late. I looked at Victoria. In philosophy, they talk about the difference between being and having. Victoria had things, titles, praise, clothes. But she didn't be anything. Without the external validation, she was empty. I could see it in her eyes. The terrifying realization that her entire identity was a rental and the lease had just expired. I built my table, I said, standing up. I don't need a seat at yours anymore. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the papers on the table. The golden child was dethroned. The black sheep had become the wolf. And the silence in that house was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The days following Easter were a blur of logistics. I sent a team to Vertex Branding to secure the servers and begin the restructuring. Victoria was processed out quietly. No fanfare, no public shaming beyond what had happened at the dinner table. I kept my word. The data leak was plugged, the clients were made whole, and the family name remained clean.
I didn't do it for them.
I did it because I refused to let their mess become my stain. My parents tried to reach out. They sent flowers. They left voicemails about misunderstandings and pride. My mother even showed up at my penthouse building, trying to charm the doorman into letting her up. I watched her on the security feed, looking small and confused in the lobby of a building she realized she could never afford. I told the doorman to send her away. I didn't cut them off completely. I just demoted them. They went from family to relatives. People I share DNA with, people I send Christmas cards to, but people who no longer have a seat at my table. I stopped seeking their approval, and in doing so, I took away their power. They are just characters in my backstory now, not the authors of my future. Victoria moved to Arizona. She took a job in mid-level management at a retail chain. I hear she's doing okay.
Humbled, maybe.
Quiet. She sends me an email once a year on my birthday. I don't reply, but I don't delete it either. 6 months later, I launched the Jeffrey Initiative, named after the uncle who saw me when no one else did. It's a foundation dedicated to funding tech education for the invisible kids, the quiet ones in the back of the class, the ones who don't fit the mold, the ones building worlds in their heads because the real world doesn't have a place for them. I gave them the funding and mentorship I had to fight for. I walked into the foundation's headquarters yesterday. It was buzzing with activity, kids coding, arguing about logic, building things that didn't exist an hour ago. I saw a girl in the corner, headphones on, ignoring everyone, typing furiously. She looked up and caught my eye. She didn't smile. She just nodded, a tiny acknowledgement of a shared secret language. I nodded back. Success is the best revenge, they say. But that's not quite right. Success is loud. Success is external. What I found is something better.
Peace.
The quiet, unshakable knowledge that my worth isn't determined by their reaction, but by my own creation. I am sovereign. And that is a luxury money can't buy. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat at theirs, hit that like button. Share this with the black sheep in your life who needs to know they are destined for greatness. Thanks for watching.